The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez checked his gear one final time. Beside him, his team of 5 Navy SEALs prepared for what intelligence had called a routine extraction mission. The target was a downed pilot somewhere in the mountains of Kinner Province, an area known for its hostile terrain and even more hostile inhabitants. Rodriguez had been leading SEAL Team 6 operations for 8 years, but something about this mission felt different. The intelligence was too clean, too perfect. According to the briefing, a Navy pilot had crashed his F-18 Super Hornet during a bombing run against Taliban positions. The pilot had managed to eject and was supposedly hiding in a cave system about 12 kilometers from their insertion point. 5 minutes to drop. The helicopter crew chief shouted over the roar of the rotors. Rodriguez nodded and turned his team. Petty Officer First Class Jake Thompson was cleaning his sniper rifle scope for the 3rd time. Thompson was their marksman, a quiet man from Montana who could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 yards. Next to him sat Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Mendez, their communications specialist and medic, checking the batteries in his radio equipment. The youngest member of their team, Petty Officer Third Class David Chun, was reviewing the satellite images on his tablet. Chun was their explosives expert and technical specialist, barely 24 years old, but already proven in combat. Rounding out the team were Petty Officer Second Class Michael Tank Williams, their heavy weapons specialist, and Petty Officer First Class Ahmed Hassan, their intelligence and language expert who spoke fluent Pashto and Dari. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Rodriguez studied the terrain below. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, covered in rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. Deep valleys carved through the landscape like scars, providing countless hiding places for enemy fighters. This was Taliban country, and they all knew it. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. The SEALs moved quickly, grabbing their packs and weapons before jumping to the ground. Within seconds, the helicopter was lifting off again, leaving them alone in the silence of the Afghan mountains. The only sound were the distant echo of the helicopter rotors fading away and the wind whistling through the rocks. Rodriguez gathered his team around him and pulled out his map. Their objective was a cave system located in a valley about 6 hours away on foot. According to the intelligence report, the pilot, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, had been in contact with search and rescue teams for the first 12 hours after a crash. Then, her radio had gone silent. "We move in 2-man teams," Rodriguez whispered to his men. "Thompson and Hassan take point. Williams and Chin cover our 6. Mendez, you're with me in the middle. We maintain radio silence unless it's an emergency. If this pilot is still alive, she's been on the ground for 36 hours now." The team began their trek across the rocky terrain. The sun was already high in the sky, and the temperature was climbing toward 100 degrees. Each man carried 60 pounds of gear, including water, ammunition, medical supplies, and specialized equipment for the extraction. They moved carefully, using the natural cover of rocks and boulders to mask their approach. After 2 hours of steady movement, Hassan held up his hand, and the team froze. He had spotted something in the distance. Through his binoculars, he could see smoke rising from a small village about a mile away. This wasn't on their intelligence briefings. According to their maps, this area was supposed to be uninhabited. Rodriguez made the decision to investigate. If there were civilians in the area, they needed to know about it. If there were Taliban fighters, they needed to know about that too. The team changed course, moving toward higher ground where they could get a better view of the village. From their new position, they could see the village more clearly. It was small, maybe 15 or 20 buildings made of mud brick and stone. Smoke was rising from several chimneys, and they could see people moving around between the buildings. What concerned Rodriguez was the presence of several pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns parked near the village center. "That's not a civilian village," Thompson whispered into his radio. "I count at least 20 armed fighters down there." Chin was studying the satellite images on his tablet, comparing them to what they were seeing through their scopes. "Chief, this village isn't on any of our maps. It's like it doesn't exist." Rodriguez felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Military intelligence was supposed to be perfect in this area. They had satellite coverage, drone surveillance, and human intelligence assets on the ground. How could they miss an entire Taliban stronghold right in the middle of their extraction route? The team spent the next hour observing the village, documenting what they saw, and try to figure out their next move. Hassan, who was listening to radio chatter on multiple frequencies, picked up fragments of conversation in Pashto. What he heard made him even more concerned. "They're talking about Americans," he reported quietly. "Something about a woman pilot and a reward for her capture." The pieces were starting to come together, and Rodriguez didn't like the picture they were forming. If the Taliban had Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, this mission had just become much more complicated. A simple search and rescue operation was turning into a combat extraction, and they were vastly outnumbered. Rodriguez made the call to continue with the mission. They had a responsibility to Mitchell, and they weren't going to abandon her to the Taliban. But they would need to be smart about it. A direct assault on the village was suicide with only 6 men. They would have to find another way. The team continued their movement toward the target area, giving the village a wide berth. They climbed higher into the mountains, using goat paths and rocky ledges to stay hidden. The terrain was punishing, and the thin air at altitude made every step more difficult. But these men were trained for exactly this kind of mission. As they got closer to their target area, they began to see signs of recent activity. There were tire tracks in the dirt, footprints, and even some discarded equipment. Someone had been in this area recently, and based on the intelligence Hassan was gathering from radio intercepts, it was probably the Taliban fighters who had captured Mitchell. The cave system they were approaching was larger than they had expected. It wasn't just 1 or 2 caves, but a complex network of tunnels and chambers carved into the mountainside. Some looked natural, formed by thousands of years of wind and water erosion. Others appeared to have been expanded and modified by human hands, probably used as hiding places by fighters for decades. Thompson set up his sniper rifle on a ridge overlooking the cave entrance while the rest of the team prepared to move in. Rodriguez knew that once they entered those caves, they would be committing themselves to a fight. There would be no easy way out if things went wrong. Chen was preparing explosive charges that could be used to seal cave entrances or create diversions. Williams was checking his machine gun and making sure he had easy access to all his ammunition. Mendez was testing his radio equipment and preparing medical supplies in case anyone was wounded. Rodriguez took one last look at the intelligence report on his tablet. Something still didn't feel right about this whole mission. The timing was too convenient, the intelligence too specific. In his experience, real combat operations were messy and unpredictable. This felt like someone wanted them to be here. But Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was out there somewhere, possibly being tortured by Taliban fighters. Rodriguez pushed his doubts aside and focused on the mission. They would get her out, whatever it took. The team began their approach to the cave system as the sun started to set behind the mountains. They moved carefully, using hand signals to communicate and staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Rodriguez could feel the tension building in his chest as they got closer to their objective. Hassan suddenly froze and held up a closed fist, the signal for immediate halt. He had heard something. In the growing darkness, they could see the faint glow of firelight coming from one of the cave entrances. There were voices, too, speaking in Pashto, and Hassan was trying to make out what they were saying. After several minutes of careful listening, Hassan reported what he had learned. There were at least 8 to 10 fighters in the immediate area, and they were definitely holding an American prisoner. The description matched Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. Rodriguez felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that they had found their target, and dread at what they were about to face. The Taliban weren't known for treating prisoners well, especially female prisoners. Time was running out, and they needed to act fast. The team moved into position around the cave entrance. Thompson found a good sniper position with clear lines of sight. Williams set up his machine gun to cover the main approach. Chun placed explosive charges at strategic points. Mendez established a command post with radio communications. Hassan positioned himself where he could provide translation and intelligence support. Rodriguez checked his watch. It was nearly midnight, and they had been on the ground for almost 18 hours. The rescue window was closing fast. If they didn't extract Mitchell soon, the Taliban would probably move her to another location, possibly back to the village they had observed earlier. The plan was simple but dangerous. Rodriguez would lead Hassan into the cave system to locate Mitchell while the others provided overwatch and covering fire. If they ran into heavy resistance, Chun would detonate the explosive charges to create confusion while the team fought their way out. As Rodriguez and Hassan prepared to enter the cave, they could hear voices getting louder from inside. Someone was arguing in Pashto, and Hassan was picking up fragments of the conversation. What he heard made his blood run cold. The Taliban fighters were debating whether to kill Mitchell immediately or transport her to a larger base where she could be used as a propaganda tool. They had apparently been waiting for orders from their commanders, but communication problems were causing delays. Some of the fighters wanted to end it quickly and collect the bounty on her head. Rodriguez knew they were out of time. Whatever they were going to do, it had to be now. He gave Hassan the signal to move, and the two SEALs disappeared into the darkness of the cave entrance. The cave tunnel was narrow and winding, carved from solid rock, and barely wide enough for two men to walk side by side. Rodriguez and Hassan moved slowly, using night vision goggles to navigate in the complete darkness. The air was stale and smelled of smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else Rodriguez didn't want to think about. As they moved deeper into the cave system, the voices became clearer. Hassan was translating in whispers, providing Rodriguez with real-time intelligence about what the Taliban fighters were discussing. Most of it was routine conversation, but occasionally they would mention the American woman they were holding. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Rodriguez and Hassan reached a point where the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. They could see firelight flickering on the walls ahead, and the voices were much louder now. Rodriguez signaled for Hassan to stay back while he moved forward to assess the situation. Peering around a rocky outcropping, Rodriguez could see into the main chamber. There were 6 Taliban fighters sitting around a small fire, their weapons stacked against the cave wall. In the far corner of the chamber, he could see a figure tied to a metal pole that had been driven into the cave floor. Even in the dim firelight, he could tell it was Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. She was alive but barely conscious. Her flight suit was torn and dirty, and there were obvious signs that she had been beaten. Rodriguez felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm and focused. Anger would get them all killed in a situation like this. Rodriguez studied the layout of the chamber, looking for the best way to approach without being detected. The Taliban fighters seemed relaxed, probably confident that no American forces would find them in these remote caves. That overconfidence might be their downfall. He made his way back to Hassan and quickly briefed him on what he had seen. They would need to take out all 6 fighters simultaneously to prevent any of them from harming Mitchell or calling for help. It would require perfect timing and execution. Rodriguez activated his radio and contacted the rest of his team. Overwatch, this is Alpha. We have eyes on the package. 6 tangos in the main chamber. Prepare for close quarters engagement on my signal. Thompson's voice came back through his earpiece. Copy, Alpha. I have movement outside the cave entrance. Looks like more fighters approaching your position. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Not only did they have to deal with the 6 fighters in the chamber with Mitchell, but now there were additional Taliban forces moving toward the cave. Rodriguez realized they were walking into a trap, but it was too late to turn back now. He looked at Hassan and saw his own determination reflected in the other man's eyes. They had come too far to quit now. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was counting on them, and they weren't going to let her down. Rodriguez checked his weapon one more time and prepared to move into the chamber. In a few minutes, the silence of the Afghan mountains would be shattered by gunfire, and their real fight would begin. Rodriguez took a deep breath and made his final preparations. He pulled out 2 flashbang grenades and checked his rifle one more time. Hassan did the same, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. 6 armed Taliban fighters against 2 Navy SEALs in a confined space was not ideal odds, but they had trained for exactly this scenario countless times. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cave tunnels, confirming Thompson's warning about additional fighters moving toward their position. Rodriguez realized they had perhaps minutes before their escape route was completely cut off. He made the decision to act immediately. Rodriguez activated his radio for what might be the last time before the shooting started. All stations, this is Alpha. Initiating rescue in 30 seconds. Expect heavy contact. If we don't make it out, tell command the package was confirmed alive, but in enemy hands. Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. Negative, Alpha. We're not leaving without you. Execute your plan. We'll handle the reinforcements. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride in his team. These men had been through hell together in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they had never left anyone behind. They weren't going to start now. Hassan positioned himself on one side of the chamber entrance while Rodriguez took the other. They could hear the Taliban fighters talking and laughing, completely unaware of the danger approaching them. In the corner, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell appeared to be drifting in and out of consciousness. Rodriguez held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On the silent count of 0, both SEALs pulled the pins from their flashbang grenades and tossed them into the chamber. The explosions were deafening in the confined space, filling the cave with blinding light and overwhelming sound. Before the Taliban fighters could recover from the shock, Rodriguez and Hassan were in the chamber with their rifles firing. The close-quarters combat was brutal and decisive. Rodriguez put 2 rounds into the first fighter before the man could reach for his weapon. Hassan took down 2 more with precise headshots. The remaining 3 Taliban fighters were struggling to recover their vision and hearing, but they were experienced fighters who reacted quickly to the attack. One of them managed to grab his AK-47 and sprayed bullets wildly around the chamber. The ricochets off the stone walls added to the chaos and danger. Rodriguez dove behind a large boulder as bullets whined past his head. Hassan rolled to his left and found cover behind a pile of equipment the Taliban had stacked against the wall. Both SEALs continued firing, trying to finish off the remaining fighters before reinforcements arrived. One of the Taliban fighters had taken cover behind the same metal pole where Mitchell was tied up. He was using her as a human shield while he fired at the 2 Americans. Rodriguez could see the terror in Mitchell's eyes as bullets flew around her head. Hassan had a clear shot at the fighter using Mitchell as cover, but it was an extremely difficult angle. He would have to put a bullet within inches of the American pilot to take out her captor. Hassan steadied his breathing and lined up the shot through his rifle scope. The single rifle crack echoed through the chamber like thunder. Hassan's bullet took the Taliban fighter in the center of his forehead, dropping him instantly. Mitchell slumped against the restraints, unconscious from shock and exhaustion. The remaining 2 Taliban fighters were now trapped in the chamber with nowhere to run. Rodriguez and Hassan had positioned themselves to cover both possible escape routes. The fight became a deadly game of hide and seek among the rocks and shadows of the cave. Outside the cave, the rest of the SEAL team was engaging the Taliban reinforcements. Thompson's sniper rifle was picking off fighters as they tried to approach the cave entrance. Williams was laying down, suppressing fire with his machine gun, keeping the enemy at a distance. Chen had positioned his explosive charges at strategic points around the cave entrance. If the situation became hopeless, he could collapse part of the tunnel system to prevent the Taliban from following them. But that would also trap Rodriguez and Hassan inside with Mitchell. Mendez was coordinating with military command over his radio, calling for helicopter extraction and close air support. But They were deep in Taliban territory, at least an hour away from any friendly forces. For now, the six-man SEAL team was on their own. Back inside the chamber, Rodriguez was working his way around the perimeter, trying to flush out the remaining Taliban fighters. The cave was filled with smoke from the grenades and gunpowder, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction. Hassan was moving toward Mitchell's position, keeping his rifle ready for any remaining threats. As he got closer, he could see that she was badly beaten, but still breathing. Her wrists were raw and bloody from the rope restraints, and there was dried blood on her face from what appeared to be repeated beatings. One of the remaining Taliban fighters suddenly appeared from behind a rock formation, firing his pistol at Hassan. The bullets sparked off the stone walls as Hassan dove for cover. Rodriguez heard the gunfire and immediately moved to flank the fighter's position. The Taliban fighter was young, probably no more than 20 years old, but his eyes held the hard look of someone who had seen too much combat. He was shouting something in Pashto as he reloaded his pistol, probably calling for help from his comrades outside the cave. Rodriguez came around behind the fighter's position and put his rifle barrel against the back of the man's head. The fighter froze, understanding that his life was over. Rodriguez pulled the trigger without hesitation. The last Taliban fighter in the chamber had watched his comrades die one by one, and now he was alone against two highly trained American Special Operations soldiers. Instead of surrendering, he chose to fight to the end. He emerged from his hiding place, firing his AK-47 on full automatic, spraying bullets wildly around the chamber. Hassan and Rodriguez both fired simultaneously, their bullets striking the fighter in the chest and head. He spun around from the impact and crashed to the cave floor, his rifle clattering across the stone. Suddenly, the chamber fell silent except for the sound of their own breathing and the distant gunfire from outside the cave. Rodriguez and Hassan quickly checked the chamber to make sure all the Taliban fighters were dead, then rushed to Mitchell's position. She was barely conscious, drifting in and out of awareness as Hassan cut through her rope restraints. Her pulse was weak but steady, and she didn't appear to have any life-threatening injuries. The Taliban had beaten her severely, but they had apparently wanted to keep her alive for propaganda purposes. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Hassan said softly as he freed her arms. "We're United States Navy SEALs. We're here to get you out of here." Mitchell's eyes opened slightly and focused on Hassan's face. She tried to speak, but could only manage a whisper. How many of them are there?" Rodriguez was checking the chamber for any intelligence materials while Hassan attended to Mitchell. He found maps, documents, and communication equipment that might be valuable to military intelligence. But their immediate priority was getting Mitchell out of the cave before more Taliban reinforcements arrived. Hassan lifted Mitchell to her feet, but her legs buckled immediately. She was too weak to walk on her own after being held captive for more than 36 hours. Hassan would have to carry her out of the cave system. Rodriguez activated his radio to contact the rest of his team. "Overwatch, this is Alpha. Package secured and ready for extraction. What's the status outside?" Thompson's voice came back immediately. "Alpha, we have big problems out here. Estimate 20-plus fighters moving toward the cave entrance. Chun is ready to blow the charges, but that will trap you inside." The situation outside was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a simple rescue mission was turning into a major firefight against superior numbers. Rodriguez knew they needed to move fast if they were going to get Mitchell out alive. Hassan had fashioned a makeshift stretcher from Taliban equipment and blankets he found in the chamber. Mitchell was conscious but weak, and she would need medical attention as soon as they reached safety. Hassan gave her water from his canteen and some pain medication from his first aid kit. Rodriguez studied the cave system, looking for alternative escape routes. According to his map, there might be other tunnels that led to different exits. But exploring unknown caves in the dark while carrying an injured person was extremely dangerous. The sound of gunfire outside was getting closer, and more intense. Rodriguez could hear Williams' machine gun firing in sustained bursts, which meant the Taliban fighters were getting close enough to require continuous suppressing fire. Rodriguez made the decision to try the alternate escape route. Staying in the chamber was certain death, and the main cave entrance was probably already compromised. They would have to take their chances with the unknown tunnel system. Hassan secured Mitchell to the improvised stretcher and tested the weight. She was small, probably no more than 120 pounds, but carrying her through narrow cave tunnels would be extremely difficult. Rodriguez would have to lead the way while Hassan handled the stretcher. They began moving through a narrow tunnel that led away from the main chamber. Rodriguez used his night vision goggles to navigate while Hassan followed behind with Mitchell. The tunnel was barely wide enough for the stretcher, and they had to move slowly to avoid injuring Mitchell further. After 20 minutes of careful movement through the tunnel system, they could see a faint glimmer of light ahead. It might be another cave entrance, or it might be a dead end with just a small opening to the outside. Either way, it was their only hope of escape. As they got closer to the light source, Rodriguez could see that it was indeed another cave entrance, but a much smaller one than where they had entered. They would have to crawl through the opening with Mitchell, leaving them vulnerable to enemy fire if Taliban fighters were waiting outside. Rodriguez activated his radio one more time. "Overwatch, this is Alpha. We are approaching an alternate extraction point approximately 500 meters northeast of your position. Need immediate support at these coordinates." Thompson responded quickly. "Copy, Alpha. Moving to support your position. Be advised, enemy forces are spreading out to search for additional cave entrances. You may not be alone out there." Rodriguez felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. They were walking into another potential ambush, but they had no choice. The main cave entrance was compromised, and they couldn't stay hidden underground indefinitely. Hassan was struggling with Mitchell's stretcher in the narrow tunnel. She was awake but disoriented, mumbling about her aircraft and asking for water. Hassan kept reassuring her that they were American military and that she was going to be safe. As they reached the cave entrance, Rodriguez could see that it opened onto a rocky slope about halfway up the mountainside. There was good cover from boulders and scrub brush, but it would be a difficult climb down to the valley floor while carrying Mitchell. Rodriguez carefully examined the area outside the cave entrance through his rifle scope. He couldn't see any Taliban fighters, but that didn't mean they weren't there. The enemy was experienced at hiding in this terrain, and they knew the Americans would eventually have to leave the cave system. Hassan emerged from the tunnel with Mitchell's stretcher. She was more alert now, thanks to the medication and water Hassan had given her. She was asking questions about the mission and trying to understand what had happened to her aircraft. Rodriguez filled her in quickly while they prepared to move down the slope. Her F-18 had been shot down by Taliban anti-aircraft fire during a bombing mission. She had ejected successfully, but landed in enemy territory. Taliban fighters had captured her within hours of her landing. The intelligence about her location had come from Taliban radio communications that military intelligence was monitoring. What Rodriguez didn't tell her was his growing suspicion that the whole mission might have been a trap designed to lure American Special Operations Forces into an ambush. As they began their descent down the rocky slope, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes in the distance where his team was still engaged with Taliban forces. The gunfire was continuous and intense, suggesting that his men were heavily outnumbered and fighting for their lives. Hassan was having difficulty maneuvering the stretcher down the steep terrain. Mitchell was trying to help by using her arms to brace herself, but she was still too weak to contribute much. Rodriguez had to help support the stretcher while maintaining security. Halfway down the slope, Rodriguez's worst fears were realized. Taliban fighters appeared from concealment among the rocks below them, cutting off their escape route. More fighters emerged from positions higher up the slope, surrounding the small group of Americans. Rodriguez counted at least 15 Taliban fighters in positions all around them. They were armed with AK-47 assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and machine guns. The Americans were trapped in the open with nowhere to hide. Hassan immediately dropped behind the stretcher and began returning fire while Rodriguez took cover behind a large boulder. Mitchell rolled off the stretcher and crawled behind another rock, despite her injuries. She was unarmed, but still a trained military officer who understood combat situations. The Taliban fighters opened up with everything they had, filling the air with bullets and rocket explosions. Rodriguez and Hassan were massively outgunned, but they were fighting for their lives and the life of Lieutenant Commander Mitchell. Rodriguez's radio crackled with Thompson's voice. "Alpha, we can see your position. Initiating support fire in 30 seconds. Keep your heads down." Rodriguez looked toward the valley floor and could see muzzle flashes from Thompson's sniper rifle. The marksman was engaging Taliban fighters from long range, trying to reduce the odds against Rodriguez and Hassan. Williams was moving his machine gun to a position where he could support the trapped Americans. Chin was preparing to detonate explosive charges that might create enough confusion for Rodriguez and Hassan to escape with Mitchell. But Rodriguez knew they were in serious trouble. Even with support from the rest of his team, they were surrounded by superior numbers in an exposed position. Unless something changed quickly, this mission was going to end badly for everyone involved. Hassan was firing carefully aimed shots, making every bullet count. His Marine Corps training was showing as he picked off Taliban fighters one by one. But for every fighter he eliminated, two more seemed to take his place. Rodriguez was conserving his ammunition while looking for any possible escape route. The Taliban had positioned themselves well, covering all the likely avenues of retreat. It was a classic ambush, executed by fighters who knew the terrain and had probably been planning this for days. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was trying to help despite her injuries and lack of weapons. She was spotting targets for Rodriguez and Hassan, using her military training to contribute to their defense. Her determination impressed both SEALs, who had seen many people break under far less pressure. The battle was reaching a critical point when Rodriguez heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the unmistakable roar of jet engines approaching fast and low. Someone had managed to call in close air support, and American warplanes were about to even the odds considerably. The F-16 Fighting Falcons screamed overhead at nearly the speed of sound, their engines echoing off the mountain walls like rolling thunder. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he watched the aircraft bank sharply and line up for their attack runs. The cavalry had arrived, but the question was whether they would arrive in time. Rodriguez activated his radio and contacted the aircraft directly. "Falcon 1, this is Ground Team Alpha. We are surrounded by approximately 20 hostiles in the rocks below our position. We have one friendly casualty requiring immediate medical evacuation." The pilot's voice came back clear and professional. "Copy, Ground Team Alpha. We have you marked with infrared. Keep your heads down. Danger close in 30 seconds. Hassan grabbed Mitchell and pulled her behind the largest boulder he could find. Rodriguez pressed himself against the rock face as the first F-16 began its attack run. The sound of the approaching aircraft was both terrifying and reassuring. The 20mm cannon fire from the F-16 was devastating. The high explosive rounds tore through the Taliban positions like a chainsaw through paper. Rock fragments and debris filled the air as the aircraft's guns pulverized everything in their path. Several Taliban fighters tried to flee their positions, but Thompson's sniper rifle was waiting for them. His precision shooting was picking off anyone who broke cover, working in perfect coordination with the air support above. Williams had finally gotten his machine gun into position and was laying down suppressing fire on the Taliban fighters who were trying to regroup. Chin was moving through the rocks with his rifle, hunting down any remaining threats. The second F-16 made its attack run from a different angle, targeting Taliban positions that had survived the first pass. The combination of cannon fire, rockets, and the psychological impact of the air attack was breaking the enemy's will to fight. Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters abandoning their weapons and running for their lives. Those who stayed to fight were being systematically eliminated by the combined firepower of the SEAL team and the close air support. But the battle wasn't over yet. Rodriguez could hear vehicles approaching from the valley floor. More Taliban reinforcements were arriving, probably in response to the air attacks and radio calls for help. Hassan was checking Mitchell's condition while keeping watch for any remaining threats. She was holding up remarkably well considering what she had been through, but she needed professional medical attention soon. Rodriguez contacted the F-16 pilots again. Falcon 1, we have vehicles approaching from the north. Can you confirm what we're dealing with? The pilot responded immediately. Ground Team Alpha, we have eyes on 3 technical vehicles with mounted weapons. Estimate 12 to 15 additional hostiles. Engaging now. The F-16s dove toward the approaching vehicles with their guns blazing. The Taliban trucks didn't have a chance against the superior firepower and speed of the American fighter aircraft. Within minutes, all 3 vehicles were burning hulks scattered across the valley floor. Rodriguez felt the tide of the battle turning in their favor. The Taliban forces were broken and scattered, their reinforcements destroyed, and American air power controlled the skies above them. But they still needed to get Mitchell to safety before more enemy forces could arrive. Mendez had been coordinating with military command throughout the battle, and now he had good news. A medical evacuation helicopter was en route to their location, along with additional ground forces to secure the area. Thompson had moved to a position where he could provide overwatch for the entire valley. His sniper rifle could reach out and touch anyone who tried to approach their location. Williams and Chung were establishing a defensive perimeter around Rodriguez, Hassan, and Mitchell. Hassan was treating Mitchell's injuries with the medical supplies from his pack. She had multiple contusions and abrasions, signs of dehydration and exhaustion, and possibly some internal injuries from the beating she had received. But she was conscious and alert, asking questions about her fellow pilot who had been flying with her during the mission. Rodriguez had to give her the bad news. Her wingman's aircraft had been shot down at the same time as hers, but search and rescue teams had found no trace of the pilot or his aircraft. He was officially listed as missing in action, presumed dead. Mitchell took the news hard. She blamed herself for the mission failure and the loss of her wingman. Rodriguez tried to reassure her that she had done everything right, that sometimes the enemy just gets lucky, but he could see the guilt and pain in her eyes. The sound of helicopter rotors was approaching from the distance. Rodriguez looked toward the sound and could see the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk medical evacuation helicopter, escorted by 2 Apache attack helicopters for protection. The Apache pilots were already engaging scattered Taliban fighters who were still in the area. Their chain guns and rockets were systematically clearing any remaining threats from the landing zone. Rodriguez popped a smoke grenade to mark their location for the incoming helicopter. The bright orange smoke billowed up from their position, clearly visible to the aircrew even in the growing daylight. The Black Hawk helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and debris, its medics already jumping out with stretchers and medical equipment. Hassan helped transfer Mitchell to the helicopter crew, briefing them on her injuries and the treatment he had provided. Rodriguez gathered his team together for the extraction. They had accomplished their mission despite overwhelming odds and a situation that had gone wrong in almost every way possible. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was alive and would make a full recovery. As the helicopter lifted off with Mitchell aboard, Rodriguez could see the gratitude in her eyes. She gave them a thumbs up through the helicopter window, a gesture that meant more to the SEALs than any medal or commendation they might receive. Thompson was packing up his sniper rifle when he noticed something troubling. Through his scope, he could see Taliban fighters emerging from concealed positions all around the valley. There were many more of them than anyone had realized. "Chief," Thompson called to Rodriguez, "we've got a problem." I'm counting at least 50 fighters moving toward our position from multiple directions. This whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Rodriguez felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The intelligence had been too good, too specific. The Taliban had known the Americans would come for their downed pilot, and they had prepared an elaborate trap. The only thing they hadn't counted on was the skill and determination of the SEAL team. The Apache attack helicopters were already engaging the approaching Taliban forces, but there were too many of them spread across too wide an area. Rodriguez knew they needed to get his team out of there immediately. Mendez was calling for immediate extraction over his radio. Another helicopter was en route, but it would take at least 10 minutes to reach their position. The Taliban forces would be on top of them in less than 5 minutes. Rodriguez looked at his men and saw the same determination he felt in their own eyes. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to give up now. If they were going to go down, they would go down fighting. Williams set up his machine gun in a position where he could cover the main approach route. Chun distributed his remaining explosive devices among the team, giving everyone some extra firepower for the fight ahead. Hassan was monitoring Taliban radio communications, providing real-time intelligence on enemy movements. The picture he was painting was grim. The Taliban forces were well-coordinated and moving in a classic encirclement pattern. Thompson had found a new sniper position with excellent fields of fire. His rifle could reach out to 800 yards, and he intended to make every shot count. He had less than 50 rounds of ammunition left, but each bullet would find its target. Rodriguez was calculating their odds and didn't like the numbers. 6 exhausted American Special Operations soldiers against 50 or more Taliban fighters who knew the terrain and had been preparing for this fight. But they had superior training, better equipment, and the support of American air power. The F-16s were running low on ammunition and fuel, but they would stay in the fight as long as possible. The Apache helicopters were engaging targets all around the valley, but the Taliban fighters were using the rocky terrain for cover. The first Taliban assault came from the north, a probing attack designed to test the Americans' defenses. Thompson's sniper rifle spoke once, and the lead Taliban fighter dropped. Williams opened up with his machine gun, forcing the attackers to take cover. Rodriguez could see this was just the beginning. The Taliban were testing their responses, looking for weaknesses in their defensive positions. The real attack would come from multiple directions simultaneously. Hassan reported that the Taliban commanders were coordinating their assault over the radio. They planned to attack from 3 different directions at once, overwhelming the Americans with superior numbers. Chen had positioned his explosive devices to channel any attacking forces into Williams' machine gun fire. It was a classic defensive technique, using terrain and firepower to multiply their effectiveness against superior numbers. The extraction helicopter was still 5 minutes away, but Rodriguez knew they probably didn't have that much time. The Taliban assault was building, and soon they would be completely overwhelmed. Thompson's rifle cracked again, and another Taliban fighter fell. He was picking off their leaders and heavy weapons operators, disrupting their coordination and reducing their firepower. But for every fighter he eliminated, more seemed to take their place. The full Taliban assault began with a barrage of rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine gun fire. The Americans took cover behind rocks, and boulders as explosions erupted all around their position. Williams' machine gun was answering the Taliban fire, but he was vastly outnumbered. Rodriguez and Hassan were firing their rifles at targets of opportunity, trying to support Williams and Thompson. Chun detonated his first explosive device as Taliban fighters approached from the east. The explosion sent rock fragments flying in all directions and eliminated several attackers, but more kept coming. Rodriguez could hear the extraction helicopter approaching, but the Taliban were closing in fast. It was going to be a race between the American helicopter and the attacking Taliban forces. Thompson's ammunition was running low, but he continued to fire with deadly precision. Each shot eliminated a Taliban fighter, but there seemed to be an endless supply of replacements. The helicopter was now visible in the distance, a Black Hawk flying fast and low toward their position. But Taliban fighters were already within 50 yards of the SEAL position, close enough to throw grenades. Rodriguez made the decision that would define the rest of his military career. He ordered his team to fall back toward the helicopter landing zone, while he stayed behind to provide covering fire. Hassan protested over the radio, but Rodriguez was firm. Someone had to hold the position long enough for the helicopter to land and take off. Rodriguez had made his choice. Thompson was the last to fall back, his sniper rifle providing precision fire until the very last moment. Williams carried his machine gun with him as the team moved toward the landing zone. The helicopter was taking fire from multiple directions as it approached the landing zone. The crew chief was returning fire with his door-mounted machine gun, trying to suppress the Taliban attackers. Rodriguez was alone now, surrounded by Taliban fighters but still fighting. His rifle was empty, so he switched to his sidearm. When that was empty, he drew his combat knife. The Taliban fighters were closing in, but they seemed reluctant to finish him off. Rodriguez realized they probably wanted to capture him alive for propaganda purposes. That gave him one last advantage. Chin had given Rodriguez his last explosive device before falling back. Rodriguez armed the device and waited for the Taliban fighters to get close enough. He would take as many of them with him as possible. The helicopter was on the ground now, and Rodriguez's team was climbing aboard. Thompson was providing covering fire from the helicopter door, trying to keep the Taliban fighters away from Rodriguez's position. Rodriguez could hear Hassan shouting his name over the radio, begging him to fall back to the helicopter. But Rodriguez knew he wouldn't make it. The Taliban fighters were too close, and the helicopter needed time to take off. Rodriguez activated the explosive device and prepared for the end. He thought about his family, his team, and Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who was now safe because of their sacrifice. The single rifle crack that echoed through the darkness came from Thompson's sniper rifle, not from a Taliban weapon. The bullet struck the explosive device in Rodriguez's hand, detonating it prematurely and killing him instantly, along with the surrounding Taliban fighters. Thompson had made an impossible shot from a moving helicopter, sparing his team leader from capture and ensuring that Rodriguez died as a warrior. The helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the night, carrying the surviving SEALs home. The mission was officially classified as a success. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had been rescued and would return to flight duty within 6 months. But the cost had been high. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his sacrifice. Years later, when the full story of the mission was declassified, military historians would study it as an example of how elite special operations forces can accomplish the impossible against overwhelming odds. But for the men who were there, it would always be remembered as the night they lost their leader and brother. Hassan kept Rodriguez's dog tags and wore them for the rest of his military career. Thompson never missed another shot in combat, carrying the memory of that final rifle crack with him forever. Williams and Chun continued to serve together, honoring their fallen leader by training the next generation of Navy SEALs. Mendez retired from the military and became a teacher, but he never forgot the lesson he learned that night in the Afghan mountains. Sometimes the most important victories come at the highest cost, and heroes are defined not by how they live, but by how they choose to die. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell returned to her squadron and flew many more combat missions, but she never forgot the 6 Navy SEALs who risked everything to save her life. She kept a photo of Rodriguez on her aircraft dashboard, a reminder of the ultimate sacrifice made by warriors who never leave their people behind.